delve into the scale of COVID-19 corruption. Even more importantly, we look at the pace of investigation and prosecution of COVID-19 related corruption, and we look at what has COVID-19 highlighted about our handling of corruption as a country. To be a part of this conversation, give us your views tonight. Perpetrators of PPE corruption have been unashamedly brazen in their hijacking of these emergency funds. What is missing in our response to corruption? I'd like to get your views tonight. 072-110-5584. Otherwise, you can tweet us at Newzroom 405. Joining me for this conversation tonight, Special Investigating Unit Spokesperson Kaza Kanyahu, Corruption Watch Head of Legal and Investigations Karam Singh, and the organization Undoing Tax Abuse, Wayne Duvenage, joining us today. To be a part of this conversation, let us in on your views this evening, and we'll get those to our team of panel here tonight to give us their views. Gentlemen, good evening. It's good to have you with us.
Good evening, Thabo, and good evening to the viewers at home.
Perpetrators and Tate Kaiser of PPE corruption have been unashamedly brazen in hijacking the emergency funds, and we've seen this. But it's not something that is particularly happening now. Corruption has been with us for a while, even with the Zondo Commission and the revelations that are coming out of there. Those with a tendency to want to steal felt they could still do it in this time of a pandemic. What's missing in our response to corruption, except for the usual, I'm going to say the hollowing out of our institution and so on and so forth? Now we are saying our institutions have been revitalized, reinvigorated, yet we still see the same.
Yeah, thank you very much, Thabo. Basically, I think the public must understand that when the COVID-19 pandemic started, and there was a need for emergency procurement that had to happen at that point. And the people who were used to doing corruption before, they were able to then think that now that there's an emergency procurement, it means the processes that are there, starting from processes that are embedded in our Constitution, in the Public Finance Management Act, Municipal Finance Management Act, and the procurement processes and policies within the institutions are there. Then they just decided to go over all of those, because they thought nobody will come looking because of the fact that it is an emergency. Little did they know that we will be watching, and we will then follow up each and every transaction that has happened and make sure that people who have done wrong are then dealt with if the evidence leads us to them.
Yeah, vulnerability, you're saying, of the emergency procurement measures. Karam, is there something lacking there that we didn't know that we know now, and are we doing anything to change?
The change seems to be coming along very, very slowly. I mean, I think I would agree with what Kaiser has said, but I think we need to look at the vulnerabilities within the system. Why is the system so vulnerable? And despite, the rebuilding of our institutions like the MPA, we see still a lot of contestation in the police, that people still felt that they could get away with this. So, I mean, I think there's problems with the rules of the game. And I think in terms of procurement, we've been talking a lot about the need for a much more robust and corruption-proof procurement system, because that's where we've seen lots of the money going. But I think institutionally, from a law enforcement standpoint, the SIU has been doing a fantastic job, but, is the law enforcement response commensurate to the challenge that we're seeing? Why are we not seeing a more robust commitment towards a dedicated anti-corruption agency? Why aren't we seeing a robust rollout of the National Anti-Corruption Strategy, which was approved by Cabinet at the end of last year? So, I think we're still in a very reactive mode, and I think the concern that we have is that institutionally our response is still deficient given the scale of the challenge.
Wayne Duvenage, monitoring discrepancies still pretty much in a reactive mode when you're speaking to government. In fact, it has proven to be quite difficult if you have a look at how people who are not eligible to get the social relief of distress grant were able to access that. People who were either deceased, people who were either working for the department who were hired in there, the systems just couldn't talk to each other, couldn't monitor in time, and couldn't pick it up in time. What's the failing?
Yeah, well, I think you hit the nail on the head there. I mean, it's so sad that we should have this broken system where people are able to very easily circumvent the barriers and the rules that are supposed to be there to block individuals from earning funds unnecessarily or illegally, and they continue to do so. So, as Karam says, it goes right down to procurement. It permeates government in all levels, right from local government to national. And we see a flouting of the rules and the regulations that should never, never be able to take place. And yet they do with such ease. But I guess our biggest frustration and our biggest problem is that still to this day, very little accountability. I mean, quite frankly, the hundreds of people, thousands that were dipping their fingers into the SASSA grants that had no right to do so are probably all still employed. Not one has been dismissed, as far as we know. And they have the details of the individuals. And this is not a case of a mistake. This is theft from you and I. And we really do get angry about the fact that there's no accountability. And that's the problem that we see today.
Kaza Kanyako Karam Singh as well as Wayne Divinage with us tonight. Let's get your views. What's missing in our corruption response as South Africa that allows those with a tendency to steal, to act so brazenly, even in a time of an emergency? And when we come back, when I hear from Kaza Kanyako how the SIU plans to deal with the fact that reports have been released, yet they are sitting on the desk of the president without the executive recommendation and action that needs to follow there, not actually being taken right now. Let's get that reaction from Kaza when we come back. Stay with us. Love with you tonight here on In Focus. Thanks for staying on the spotlight, highlighting our response to corruption in the time of a pandemic, and just how deep and endemic is corruption in our system, and how quickly do we respond to it and therefore set an example and ensure that those who are guilty are held accountable. Kaza Kanyako Karam Singh as well as Wayne Divinage with us tonight in the conversation. Before the break, Kaza is saying, many people are saying, look, we have no idea, for example, right now, the extent of what actually happened in the Digital Vibe saga, although, of course, there's a leak and people think we kind of like have an idea. But it is sitting in the president's desk. You were in Parliament this past week and you said that your investigation has been completed and it is sitting there. Do you think there is generally a fault in that particular relationship, that the president or the executive has got to be involved at some degree in this decision for you to investigate? And should you not be investigating independently?
Yeah, this is a very interesting one. But let me start it this way by saying, you see, with this president that we are having now, we can already see a lot of movement, especially when it comes to the issue of signing of proclamation. Look, for an example, as this particular proclamation. For the first time in the history of the SIU, we got a proclamation that is open-ended so that we don't waste time in investigating these issues. Therefore, it helped us to investigate the PPE corruption immediately when we get it. Therefore, that is a sign of goodwill from the side of the president. But obviously, the law says to us that we must give the report to the president, and we do that, and we can safely say that the president has gone out of his way to say, go out and investigate and give me the reports. And you'll remember with the PPEs alone, he has even made something that was never done before, where he requested us to give reports every 6 weeks, which we have been doing. And for us, it is important. But we must also know that there are other elements that we are dealing with in between. For an example, we don't have to wait for the report to be given to the president or to be released for us to deal with the issues that are at play. Let's take the example that we're giving of these Digital Vibes. We did not have to wait to give the report to the president for us to start the process at the Special Tribunal and make sure that we start to recover the money. We did not wait for the report to be released for us to make referrals for the NPA to act on the criminality. We did not wait to do the referral that relates to the people that are in the department that needs to be disciplined. All of those things are going together with the report being given to the president. Therefore, we are moving parallel to the report being given to the president to make sure that there's progress in the work that we do.
Yeah. The recommendations you make for executive action, many are saying, well, will end at the fact that a minister can resign or an HOD can be fired. I mean, that's as far as you can go as the SIU. The rest has got to be the Hawks and the NPA prosecuting and making sure that those people get behind bars. But what happens in an instant where your recommendations end there and the president says, oh, well, he resigned and that's the end of it?
But that is not the case, Thabo. You will remember that on the 29th of July, we instituted a case at the Special Tribunal where we want to set aside that contract and recover the whole 150 million that was spent. Therefore, nobody can come and say, no, it just ends there and people go and whatever. No. We follow up the matter. Each and every person who got the money out of this 150 million rand is a respondent in that matter, and we want to recover that money because that part is totally within our control as the SIU, and we are able to follow it up and make sure that that money is returned to the Department of Health for the purpose that it was intended to do.
Karam, the involvement of executive in the decision to investigate and the president himself signing those proclamations, and do you find that a bit of a challenge?
It certainly is a challenge. I think the SIU is definitely a credit to our fight against corruption, and it's a credit to the country that we have a public institution, a statutory body that can do the types of forensic investigations that the SIU can do. But it's not an ideal situation because, there are issues around the independence when the investigation can only flow from a proclamation. So it's clearly a different situation than a situation that an independent anti-corruption agency would have. The SIU only has civil law jurisdiction. So as you've indicated, if they uncover criminality in their investigations, there's a handoff that has to happen to the police and to the NPA. So despite the effectiveness of the SIU, despite now the important development of the Special Tribunal and the modality of being able to now do civil recoveries, it's not an ideal situation, and it's not the same as having a body which would have that inherent mandate to investigate without the executive asking them to.
Yeah. Civil recoveries, Wayne Duvenage, is that consequence enough, or at least being dismissed from your position? I mean, who knows? 5 years from now, you'll emerge at another SOE.
Yeah, and we see a lot of that in government, where people are held accountable, but at a very low key, suspended for years, and they pop up somewhere else. So we believe that the state should be taking a far harder line. So not only go after and fetch the money and prosecute, but start out by dismissing the individuals. We also see it in state-owned entities where the new boards have all the information of the conduct and the hearings and the transactions that took place while these state-owned entities were being decimated, but they don't go after the individuals, and they leave that up to the NPA or to civil society organizations, and that's not enough, whereas they've got all the information required, and it's actually, their obligation to go after past individuals who've brought these organizations to their knees. So, yeah, we would like to see government in all forms, from boards of these organizations to the NPA, the Independent Directorate, SIU, who are doing a great job, and with her new powers now, the Auditor General. There's a lot of accountability that can be held, and we shouldn't let anybody who's found wanting to be able to resurface again.
Kaiser, let's talk then about that question of accountability. I don't know if the number has gone up. Initially, you had indicated about 75 businesses being investigated for the abuse of the UIF, the TERS funds. I don't know if you're investigating more firms there. The criticism of the SIU is that you are not going after private individuals, or at least we are not seeing that visibly, you going after private firms and holding them accountable and recouping those monies.
Yeah, no, I think that criticism is unfounded, Thabo, because you will see that firstly, as the SIU, we doing investigation in government institutions. And when we find that the government was involved with private organizations or companies, and then they benefited, we go after them. All these companies that you're talking about, like Letla and all of that, they are private, and we are going after them. You will see, for example, in cases where we were dealing with the issue of Eskom and ABB, and we went after them, and they paid that 1.6 billion rand that they needed to pay back. Therefore, that accusation is very much unfounded, and we will go where the evidence takes us. If the evidence leads us to you, and you are a private company, you have done business with a state institution, and you have done it in an unlawful manner, we will come after you and make sure that you will recover whatever. If the contract is to be cancelled, we'll cancel it and make sure that you pay back the money that you would have gotten unfairly. That we will do at all instances.
Yeah. So of the 75 businesses you were investigating for the TERS corruption, how many of them are you confidently able to say they can be held criminally liable?
Yes, like you have got from Wayne and from Karam, you will understand that when it comes to criminality, we have to work with our sister law enforcement agencies to make sure that we refer that part to them, because we do not have the powers to deal with the criminal side of things. We will do those that we are able to do, which is to make sure that we follow up and make referrals in relation to people who have done wrong, and we have done so, and we make sure that we follow up to make sure that the people who have done wrong are dealt with. We get the report back, as we might have seen. For example, we made a referral in the Gauteng Department of Health for the SCM head to be disciplined. She was disciplined and found guilty and dismissed. And we follow up to make sure that that is done. We do the same when we have got to recover. You've seen a lot of judgments that were made at the Special Tribunal where we recover the money. Where people try to run away by resigning, we block their pensions until we are able to know that there is nothing that we need to recover from them. All of those things we do, but criminality we've got to give to the NPA.
Is there any idea of how much was lost to corruption during this time of PPE? There's a quantum, for example, of 500 billion that was made available for emergency funds. And every time people speak, they speak of this 500 billion that went missing. I don't know how true is that and what are the facts around the actual amount of money that we lost to corruption during this time of the pandemic.
Yes, I cannot give you the figure of how much money is lost because I can only tell you about how much the value of the contracts that we are investigating. We are investigating, the value of the contract we're investigating is 14.8 billion rand, where we are investigating contracts awarded to 4,302 service providers. Therefore, that is the value that we are investigating at the moment.
And of that,
in terms of PPEs.
Yes, in terms of that 14.8 billion, how many have you taken to the Special Tribunal for civil claims successfully? The ratio of your success in getting that money back, or at least getting those contracts cancelled?
You see, at the moment, we are still having a lot of cases that are before the Special Tribunal. And because we are doing investigation on the one side and taking them as we go, I will not be able to say this is what has been finalized, because some of the cases, for example, it is when we freeze the account of the person that has resigned, would want to run away. Therefore, the cases will continue at a different time. Therefore, at the present moment, I don't have a round figure of those that are done, but I'll just remind the public about the finalization of the issue that related to Ledla. You remember about the 40 million rand that was paid to different companies, where we freeze their accounts and we're dealing with that matter. As we speak, we are working on the issue of the former CFO of Gauteng Health, who is, the matter is now going to be, I think, on the 16th. The matter will be, we'll be looking at the other issues relating to case management, but also on the same day, the issue of the 150 million that we want to recover will be also on the case management to make sure that the processes are in place and we recover all the money that we need to recover.
Yeah. Do we have any idea, Karam, how much money cannot be accounted for?
I think we have that round figure yet, but the one comment that I do want to make, and this is obviously no fault of the SIU, is that the way that figure of actual recoveries becomes a fraction of the amount that's under investigation. So you start off with this big amount of billions of rand that are under investigation. Then you get a fraction of that actually gets frozen. And then you get a fraction of that actually gets recovered. And the head of the SIU spoke about this in the PPE investigation when he spoke about how they were able to trace the money and how it gets dissipated into numerous bank accounts. And then it becomes very difficult to recover the money. So, this then takes our argument back to the need to have much more robust systems, preventative measures in place before the money is stolen. Because once the money is stolen, it's very, very difficult to recover. So, fantastic work is going on in the Special Tribunal. But if we're talking about 14 billion under investigation, the actual recoveries we're going to see at the end of the day is going to only be a fraction of that, maybe tens of millions. And that's, I think, very frustrating for the public.
I see you nodding your head there. Let me come back. I want you to talk to us about those difficulties. What you're saying, as the money gets split up into the various bank accounts, what difficulty do you actually encounter as the SIU in recovering those funds? Kaiser had the conversation highlighting the rising number of corruption cases reported even during the time of the pandemic, as those with tendencies to steal went brazenly for the emergency funds which were meant to serve the poor. What is missing in our response to corruption that needs to be improved, particularly when it comes to addressing the consequences? Are the consequences enough? Let's get your views at Newzroom 405-072-110-5584. Dr. Kanyaka, I saw when Karam was mentioning the question that the money gets split so widely and so broadly into various bank accounts that it becomes practically impossible for you to be able to recover all of it. You nodded there. What are the challenges?
Yeah, no, thank you very much. The challenges are very clear because you must understand that we are dealing with people who do not want to be caught. And they make sure that when the money gets to them, they've got to move it as quickly as possible. For an example, that matter with Letla, when they were paid that 39-point-something million, within few hours, it was distributed to about 40 companies. And you can understand, now you've got to follow each and every company to understand why they deserve to have received that amount of money. And that kind of work stretches the work that we are supposed to do. In as much as we are saying, for example, we are looking into 4,308 companies, but then when you get closer, therefore, because of the money being distributed from one point to the other, the numbers of the people that we've got to follow in one case might end up being 40 other companies, which adds the time that we need to put onto that investigation, and that becomes a challenge for us.
So what then do you say? I mean, I know you've got the Auditor General, for example, who tried at the time to be a little bit proactive as far as the situation of the COVID-19 spend is concerned, to see if we can be more proactive as opposed to reactive in dealing with the question of corruption. What's the SIU's view, and what investment are you making towards that you don't end up coming in at the later stage, or at least after the president has signed the proclamation? I mean, is there anything legally that you can do to empower you?
Yes, we unfortunately, investigation can only happen once something has happened, wrongdoing has happened. But we have the view very clearly that we need to also get into the issue of prevention. And how do we then do that as the SIU? When we were investigating an issue in a department, we then go back to that department and show them, we do a report that shows them the loopholes that have happened for them to be where they were because of that investigation. And that will assist them in looking at blocking and closing those loopholes before the next person can decide to do that. But we also have outreach programs. Unfortunately, we didn't do much of them now because of COVID, where we would go to schools, because we believe that we can start instilling this as a spirit or this way of doing things from as young as people in schools, to say to them, crime does not pay, corruption does not pay, so that when they see these things, they are able to then report them. Because if the public works with us and are able to come to us and have confidence in the fact that we will do something about it, people who see these things, they stay with these people in their families, will be able to come to us and say, we see this happening, here is proof. And that way, that can be a deterrent for the others who are planning to do this in future.
Wayne, are the consequences enough? Is the hand of the law tough enough on those who are corrupt to send a message that corruption will not be tolerated?
Well, the laws are strong. The sanctions are good. It's just a matter of applying them. And I want to go back to what Kaiser was saying, is that it's about transparency. You know, if we could just get what is happening more transparent, we would be able to have accountability. We'd be able to stop the transactions from taking place a lot earlier. And because we'd be able to start asking tough questions about why is, and this is what happens so often, is that contracts are paid up front. So you see very often a bridge contract where a tenth of the work is done and the money's gone, and the contractors have gone off with the funds, roads, sewage systems, and the list goes on. And we just cannot fathom that the authorities give the money up front. The full amount is paid, or 75% of it is paid. But, coming back, Thabo, to the question of I mean, if you're found guilty of the corruption, you will go to jail. If you just apply the rule of law and you get the sufficient evidence, and the evidence is generally always there. But the problem is that it's too late. We've lost the money. We've lost the ability to bring people to book in a meaningful way and stop these funds. And that's because there's a lack of transparency. We need to get society to become the eyes and ears so we can start doing more reporting and start stopping these transactions from happening in the first place.
In practical terms, Kaz, I'll come to you in a moment and ask you the very same question, but I want to put it to Karam first. One would say maybe it's a bit of an obvious question, but why and how are people in high-ranking positions still able to get away with a lot of this corruption that comes? I mean, the ministers, MECs, and they'll all tell you that we have nothing to do with tenders. We are not even there. Yet, when the investigation comes to the bottom of it, you'll find that somehow they actually did have something to do with it.
Well, I mean, this goes to, deep-seated questions about our current political culture and, the state of the ruling party. There are too many people in high places, people in cabinet, MECs, leaders in municipalities that have clouds over their heads, that have been implicated in corruption, but for whatever reason have kept their place because of political patronage, because of cronyism, because of balance of power within the governing party. We just don't have a zero tolerance type of culture. Even the resolutions around step aside, we've seen some progress there, but we certainly haven't seen it across the board. So perhaps the former Minister of Health resigning the way that he did, following a type of scandal, perhaps that does turn a page for us. But increasingly we see ministers implicated. I see the Minister of Higher Education implicated in the scandal. Where's the calls for accountability in terms of his role in that scandal? Let's see how that story unfolds. But it's a barrage, Thabo. It's something that we're seeing. Every week we're seeing a new corruption story, and this is now post-Zondo. This is not now the era of state capture. This is in our new moment, and it's the progress is questionable.
Dr. Kaiser, how rife is this issue of abuse of power in South Africa, and how often have you encountered it? Let's just focus it on this particular instance of PPE abuses that we have seen in the last 18 months.
Yes, we have found, when we did our press conference in February, we have indicated very clearly that we have seen in some instances where political pressure was put on people to make certain decisions. But I want to say this, Thabo, that all our investigations are allegation-based, and all our outcomes are evidence-based. For us, it doesn't matter what position you hold. We will make sure that if the evidence leads us to you, we'll come to you. But also, we have got this issue of accountability at all levels that we are looking at. And we ask questions to say, if this has happened, where were you? What was your responsibility as the head of the department, as the MEC? And you have seen that there are examples, for example, in Gauteng, where the MEC ended up being relieved of his duties. We had the same situation because of our investigation. And we had the same situation in the Eastern Cape, where the MEC of Health was relieved of her responsibility because of that. For us, it doesn't matter whether you are a political principal or not. If there is something that leads us to you, we will make sure that we make the relevant referral to your principals, and something will be done about it.
Moving forward, Wayne Devanage, organizations that deal and observe corruption, what patterns are we likely to follow going forward in putting pressure and in agitating for action?
So I think the actions that we are starting to see, and certainly us is very involved in empowering citizen organizations, so civil society, to become more aware of their duties and their roles and responsibilities. Far too often we see civil society sitting back and not participating as much as they can and should in the managing of their towns and cities. So they have rights. They don't know how to exercise those rights enough, and they are empowered. And so we're going to be assisting resident associations, indigenous community associations, business forums, to start participating in the integrated development plans, the budgeting processes, to start asking the tough questions, to start insisting on transparency, and then helping them build strong legal cases against the authorities in those towns and cities so that they can take over. And we see it in a couple of towns where residents start to take over the functions of some of the cities, funds are diverted to them. And it's another way of ensuring that there is good governance and greater participation. So it's that style of leadership and it's that style of citizen engagement that we need to see more of going forward. And I think we're going to see a lot of it because our towns and cities have been trashed literally over the last decade or so, and there's a lot of rebuilding to do. These next local elections are going to be very interesting, but from here on, we've got to make sure that citizens understand their role and to start participating more.
Kaiser Khanyago, Karam Singh, Wayne Divinage, appreciate your time and thank you for joining us tonight here on In Focus.